Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Layla, and I am the Acting Research Forum Manager, and I'm stepping in for Wenny to introduce everyone and do a bit of housekeeping before we kick off this afternoon. So this event has been organised as part of our Courtauld Contemporary Research Group, and for this event, we are delighted to be joined by Christina Peake, Victoria Barrow-Williams, and Fiona Parry. This hour presents work by Christina, an artist and Turner Contemporary Digital Commission winner 2020 to 2021. And Christina will explore not only the autobiographical and familial narratives in her work, but also look at the work she's been doing as an educator for the Black curriculum and outreach within her local community in South London. And after the presentation, we will have a panel portion of the evening where Victoria and Fiona will join Christina on screen. So Victoria is co-founder of the Peopledom Collective and has mentored Christina throughout the commission period. Fiona is senior curator at the Turner Contemporary and has been working closely with Christina as well throughout this commission. So before I hand over to Christina to get started, I wanted to flag that there will be time for any of your questions at the end. So please do put any of these in the chat and our panelists will try and get to as many as they possibly can. So that is all from me for now. I just want to say thank you again to our speakers for joining us, and I will pass it over to them to get started.
Thank you. So I'm just going to share my presentation here. So bear with me one moment. So thank you so much for that introduction. So today I'm going to be sharing with you the SACRED ECOLOGIST commission, which we hope will be going live by the end of this month. So the SACRED ECOLOGIST commission, I read it as living in three parts. So the first part is a series of films that really kind of reflect four islands that have their own individual stories and form this kind of archipelago across, like, say, Botany Bay and Margate Main Sands and all the way down to Broadstairs, of the stories and the relationships that we formed. The second part of this commission is the graphic novella, which I will be sharing with you today. And this shows the kind of overarching narrative of this commission, but also I think of my practice, really. Forgive me, my voice has been going a little bit lately. And the final part is the community engagement program that is part of this commission. And it's been an extraordinary experience to see how generous the communities of Margate, of Thanet have been. So I'm going to be sharing with you the radical acts of cultural fluorescence that I've observed, throughout my life and within this commission. So starting with this first work here called Welcome to the Ends. So that's kind of linking to my kind of London vernacular and growing up. So welcome to the ends, welcome to my manor, to my yard. I'm welcoming you to my home. And I want to start off with kind of the origin stories of my natural mythologies. Now, I think all of us throughout this period with COVID and with lockdown, we've all had our territories just unreservedly restricted. And that's been my experience too. However, within that, what I found, and what I think, again, because many people were talking about last year, 2020 being the year of nature, is that I started exploring the local lands and the areas around me to understand, what those places were, and because they were only places I could go, really. So with this work here, this is the entry point into the Mitcham Common and Beddington farmlands, which I think has a really fascinating ecological heritage where I live. So this area, for over the last 150 years, has been a site of waste management. So since the Victorian era, so when we've had, when London was known as the Big Stink, when you had, those open sewage and slurry and all these kinds of things, they started, siphoning that off, taking out, and then, some of this was taken to areas such as Mitcham in South London. Now, this has been closed to the public all of this time, over those 150 years, but now, the irony is that a place that was known for sewage and most recently in recent decades for landfill and waste is now identified as a site of critical environmental and conservation interest, with rare breeds and endangered species now living there. And that's my land, that's where I walk now. So that act of walking, I found over the last year, over a year now, became a performative practice. And I decided grounded me within this natural space, because I was trying to find some kind of stability in this kind of unreality that we found ourselves in. And the product of that, or the outcome of that, is that I have been reinvesting in my relationships with the natural world. So I think a key aspect here that I want to kind of bring out is how those origin stories of how those natural mythologies have informed the creative ecologies that are inherent within my practice. So looking at that synergy and how that has come about, that organic kind of evolution. So I look at the past relationships I have had with a diverse set of communities. So in 2017, I attended a residency in the Peruvian Amazon, working with Indigenous communities. And the main community I worked with was the Cucama community. And that changed everything for me. Getting to know Miguel here, who was known as a jungle man, but that reference in terms of him being a jungle man within that community was a real accolade and recognition, not just of his knowledge in terms of being able to survive and thrive within the Amazon jungle, within the rainforest, but it said and it recognized his spirituality, his affinity with the way in which you took only what you could put back, what you could give back. It was always an equality in the relationship between him and the jungle that he loved. And he found me very inelegant and very comical, because I think you can imagine how a London girl in the Amazon rainforest would come across, and it was pretty accurate what he thought of me, really. But this was where I saw acted out in front of me how symbiotic relationships between humanity and nature could exist. But the other thing I recognized, or I saw when I was there, was that it showed the commonalities of the challenges that we face. So the Amazon, to me, when I was growing up, I mean, this was like the archetypal kind of natural environment that I wanted to visit since childhood. This was, the Caribbean to me. So my mum is from Barbados, my father was English, from Sussex. And the Caribbean was like this supernatural kind of place to me. Like everything was just, from the cockroaches and millipedes to fireflies and hummingbirds and the corals and the seas themselves. This was just so poignant and vivacious in my memory. So the Amazon was just like a league above that. So it was always like this. It was the ultimate kind of natural environment that I could visit. But as someone, as I said, growing up in London, who grew up on a diet of David Attenborough's, nature documentaries, where, you have these pristine paradises put forward to you over your television, in the evening, and that my kind of urban kind of imagination and sensibilities just was intoxicated by that imagery. But the reality was that these natural mythologies that I had developed since childhood were disrupted when I visited this space when I was in Central Tomas, just outside, about an hour outside of Iquitos, where you went straight into the primary jungle. Because I'm visiting that place, you saw, there was litter all over the banks. You had like dirty nappies and things, in the rivers and the tributaries coming off the main river. But this also, those commonalities of those challenges also linked back then when I walk into my ends, into my yard, into my area, on Mitcham Common and the Beddington farmlands, and you have fridges and computers and things like fly tipped under trees, and you have litter thrown out of people's car windows, all around this boundary. So you have this boundary of race that encapsulates, the 600 acres of land. So to me, what that experience in the Amazon informed in my creative ecologies was that a global struggle became localized to me. It became something that wasn't a monolith. It was something that I could actually find connection and reference and see how it also was reflected in the places and the towns and the communities where I lived. So this work, Moored in Congress, reflects now some of my childhood within the Caribbean, within Barbados, and my observations and engagement with beach politics. So the beach is a beautiful space to me, especially, you know, it's extraordinary experience that I think that I've had growing up in the Caribbean, seeing those beaches of Barbados, which are stunning, but they've also been politicized spaces. So on the left here, next to Uncle Luther and his Jaguars, as you do, you have people sitting in the water there. Now, this place is called the Pot. So this is where you have hot water runoff from the rum distilleries, goes into the pot. And this was a place where, you know, the elders and the community would come and they'd sit, you know, from like 5 a.m. and discuss, like, you know, the social and critical, you know, issues of the day. And it is quite incongruous when you're watching, you know, grown people with shower caps on, you know, chatting about these things. And as a child sitting there, and mum would take us there, this wasn't something that you could just involve yourself in. You know, this was grown folks' business and conversation. So you would have to wait your turn and evolve and mature and, you know, have your learned opinions at a point when you were then considered grown. So, you know, this to me is one of those conceptions of, you know, Moulton Harney's ideas of or, you know, writings about the undercommons. For me, this was the salon of the undercommons. So when we're talking about the beach as a politicized space, this wasn't just say from my experiences of sitting in the pot and watching these, you know, morning congress. This was also things like, it was encapsulated in the calypsos that I heard growing up, you know, and they can be highly politicized songs talking about critical issues of that day. So the Calypsonian, the Mighty Gabby, wrote this song called Jack. Jack is this, you know, throwback to and recognition of that British colonial past within Barbados. And this song specifically critiques the exclusion of local Bajans from public beaches. So, you know, we have to consider and understand that, you know, in Barbados, this primary economy, its primary industry is tourism. So every year, you know, there's a new hotel and it's more expensive than the other, and the dreams and sophistications of paradise that are sold abroad to enable those tourists to come in, you know, grow consistently, exponentially. And as such, there's also lobbying to have those beautiful, stunning public beaches that sell those dreams to be private. And I just, you know, I always found that difficult. And, you know, I couldn't help but observe when I was growing up that a lot of the time, you know, you're looking at beaches and these expensive hotels and, you know, you have, you know, beaches, you know, filled with, like, say, white tourists, but the people that have been excluded were local Black Bajans. You know, a lot of the time, the territories of the hotels, when they weren't successful in their lobbying, would put those territories closer and closer and closer together, those boundaries. So you had reduced access. You had to walk further and further to get to the same public space. And, you know, for me, I find it so hard to imagine beaches as commercial properties, as naive as that may sound, because to me, they're spaces of commons, ones where anyone can stand on that beach, look at that horizon and imagine an adventure that lies beyond that space. And I think this directly links to the experience within the Commission in Margate, because they're, you know, people that came forward and were part of the community engagement program spoke of their experience of participating in the Black Lives Matter march that that Victoria and the co-founder of People Then Collective, Kelly, organised, and her experience of that agency of contributing to that, and the fact that that was in her area, that was where she lived, and people were politicised and walked those beaches in support of one another. So in this work, The Merits of Glitter Visions Over Rum Futures, I'm going to open a little bit about, you know, those origin stories within my family of our marine identities. So Mum, or Margaret, as we should present her in this presentation, you know, as a child, you know, when you'd have rough storms, the corals would break off, the sea fans, sea eggs and things would come up onto the shore, and Mum would collect them, and they were her treasures. And when she emigrated to the UK, those treasures and that spirituality, that identity came with her. So within our home, where most people had, you know, maybe teapots and figurines on their mantelpiece or in display cases, we had coral and shells and sea fans and all this iconography of the sea in our home had that place. So I guess what in this image, what I'm trying to show is this intergenerational development of our marine identities within our family, and how, you know, in this image, you know, the corals and those shells and the seas impacted upon our person within our physicality, and we wear that proudly. So in this still from one of the films, Play for a Day in the Sands of the Home Isles, this speaks of a key question, theme or inquiry within the commission that I had presented from the very beginning, which is the experience of migrating Caribbean communities and their marine identities, and how they found homes, surrogate homes within UK coastal spaces. So in this case, and the one that I experienced from visiting Margate back from the 1980s, was that Margate became, for my mum, that surrogate space, that sand, which was the closest thing that she could find, the consistency of the white sands of Paynes Bay and Accra Beach in Barbados, were what she found here. So her and her friends, as many families I think have, Caribbean families, different people from different backgrounds and ethnicities, have come on the train, come to Margate for that day to enjoy the sunshine. And for me, I always remember the soft seas. It has a soft, like kind of lapping waves that again would remind me of the west coast of Barbados, which is known for those calm seas. So I think another theme or iconography that I'm seeing repeating in my work is this house on top of this island here, which is a chattel house. Now, a chattel house originates back from, you know, early colonial period within Barbados, and this was like the original kind of mobile housing. You know, you could take this down, flat pack it, put it on a cart, and it would take you, you know, if you were going to the next plantation, and what that would involve maybe, or to your next home. But I think for me, they really represent ideas of identity and belonging, and making a space your home, even if it is, you know, when it is transient, when it is mobile, because there's just the way in which these houses, when I see them, when I go home to Barbados, how they wax and wane with how families have grown and then individuals have left and pursued their own adventures. I just think there's something so familial and warm and homely about that it keeps repeating within my work. So in this work, Pandemic Reef Relief, I think this is really hinting, and well, not hinting, this is me highlighting the way in which how this commission has provided for me. Yes, I'm an artist, and yes, you know, you've been awarded this commission and this is what you're working on, this is what you're presenting, but we've been in lockdown for God knows how long. We're in COVID. This is a challenging space, not just in creating the work, but just as an individual. So, you know, this commission gave me a space to go to coastal spaces that I probably wouldn't have gone to or hadn't thought to go to in a very long time. Gave me place to walk within the shores of my mind and give myself release and risk and escape. And it gave me the opportunity to creatively and physically and mentally kind of breathe, but also evolve. And, you know, my creative practice in a very real sense is one of the ways in which I manage my mental health. You know, if I start to dissociate from my practice, or, you know, have that feeling of where my productivity goes down, this is a critical indicator that, you know, I need to take care, because things will be, you know, they will increase in difficulty otherwise. So it's a real strategy, survival strategy for myself. So I spoke about at the very beginning and mentioned this community engagement program. So we ran a virtual studios, and we also participated in, like, say, walking the land in these eco walks. So myself and Victoria went walking at night, which was stunning, with her and with Kelly, and having these conversations by the light of the moon along these shores, talking about, you know, Caribbean heritage, our different experiences, you know, what it was like growing up in Margate. But also in this virtual studio session that you have here, you know, these ladies, and we came together, they talked about their relationship with the natural world, with the coastlines that they grew up in. They talked about how their survival strategies, how they've dealt with COVID, how they creative practice insulates and enables them to do so many things. And it was extraordinary hearing their stories, and all of these you'll be able to hear on the commission when it does go live. But I'm so grateful and so today still astonished by how explicit they were about giving so freely of themselves. So, you know, at the very heart of it is connection and friendship. And, you know, I wanted to be accessible, because for me, this is about reorientating the equity between the artist and the audience and the institution. So this is Notes on a Walk, Ideas and Affection. So actually Sarah Trillo, who's the artist on the bottom there of the virtual studio session, we went walking for 4 hours from Margate, Broadstairs, Botany Bay and Margate, long walk, and we covered so many topics. And this is only a short excerpt of all these subjects that I was noticing, and it's amazing the way in which you try and find commonalities and learn and share and move back and forth within this conversation and this connection with another person. So I think what we were doing here with this community engagement, with this program, was that we were reconnecting to place and reframing the borders of communities, or asking people to consider that. So, you know, so with the brief that we shared, how many encounters or walks, trips, you know, hellos in passing does it take for you to become part of another community, or to embrace them as a part of yours? So this program sought to ask and encourage reflections on marine congress, on reframing the sea as one of a diverse array of communities within these spaces. So if you stand within that paradigm, and consider the sea and its biodiversity as a community, is this a community known for its cultural capital, for its regenerative economy? Is it known for its spirituality, disenfranchisement, marginalization? Is it considered an ally? Are you an ally to it? Or is this a community that you have very little engagement with, and therefore may be completely indifferent to in terms of its history or its futures? So it was this repositioning and reframing how we engage with the natural world, within ourselves and one another, and how that informs ideas and potential relationships in relation to allyship. So one of the things I want to raise here is the phenomenon of coral fluorescence. So I talked about radical acts of cultural fluorescence, but I also think this is a radical act of nature that we're seeing of coral fluorescence. So, you know, when Mum spoke of those marine treasures that were on her mantelpiece, she also shared at that studio session her and our family observations of the last 40 years of the impacts of climate change in Barbados and the Caribbean that we've witnessed from annual migration between the UK and the Caribbean, the UK and Barbados. So, you know, we speak about severe coastal erosion. We speak about increasing severity and frequency of hurricanes and storms, of rising sea temperatures, of pollutions and plastic, of coral bleaching. And, you know, in the film, there's a film where one of the films is called Treasures Lost in the Storm That Came to the Isle of Freedom's Prey. And in that, you know, she directly references that compulsion for collection of marine treasures that are no longer present anymore because they don't come up after the storm when she takes those walks. And we're seeing, you know, we are seeing also, you know, these countries, these islands within the Caribbean being active in terms of trying to protect and invest in their blue economies, in their territory. So, for example, in Grenada, you have the underwater part there. It's actually created by a British artist called Jason DeCaris Taylor, where they've created fire sculptures, artificial reefs, which are now protecting, and are kind of a divergence for tourism to protect and allow the natural reefs to recover. But in terms of these survival strategies, this phenomenon of coral fluorescence, and with thanks to the Ocean Agency and their work in documenting this phenomenon that was seen in Caledonia in March 2016. And we've also seen this now being documented in the recent series that's on the BBC called David Attenborough's Life in Colour. And the second episode profiles this phenomenon that we're seeing of coral fluorescence. And what we're seeing here is corals producing almost like a sunscreen, I think is maybe one of the best analogies to describe it, as a way to insulate themselves against rising sea temperatures. But many times, you know, this may be the case that they still end up bleaching. And as you can see where you've got the white exoskeletons there. But like, I think in any case of life on this earth, you know, if such threats continue, there's only so long you can resist them if they continue to be compounded. So this work here entitled The Revelers Portal, this portal actually was a direct reference to one of the conversations that Sarah and I had when we were walking, and she described the chalk stacks that become accessible once the tide goes out on Botany Bay, and that you can walk through the space. And this is a space where she said, you know, it was like you could walk into another world. And for me, I wanted to show kind of walking into, say, my world, I guess. So this is an act of creating a space, I guess, of one's own within Botany Bay, within this coastline. I guess this is my act of belonging in Margate. But in reference to that coral fluorescence, I think what I have seen over the years as I've been growing up is Caribbean communities exhibiting acts of cultural fluorescence. So I think I've witnessed over the years Caribbean communities taking the best parts of their creative practices, of their of creative production, and using that as a way in which to promote community cohesion and solidarity, as well as to insulate themselves against systemic racism, disenfranchisement, and marginalization. And so for me, Carnival is such an iconic event because, one, I think it's, I've always loved the idea that you confront racism with one of the most inclusive events that you can imagine, because it's one where, when it comes to mass, anyone can be a part of that. All are we is one, and one is all are we, as you'd say. But also these are sites of subversion and performance and resistance, and have been for hundreds of years. So this is a strategy that we know works. But once again, in reference to that coral fluorescence that we see, and the cultural fluorescence that I've just observed and shared, there are commonalities in the challenges that we face. So when we look here, so this is a still from Calypso offering to the spring tides on Treasure Island. So I really wanted to just make a point of this idea of waste as treasure. So the sculptures, on creating them, I was walking the lands from where I live in Mitcham Junction and in the Bennington farmlands, and there were old landfill tips there. So I would collect old pieces of like Victorian glass and pottery. I collected shells and seaweed and things when I was walking along the shores of Margate and Botany Bay and Broadstairs, and collected also, pulling pieces of like rubbish out of the sea, or collecting like fishing rope and things that had come up onto the beach. So this reminds me of a story of my mum, where she would describe, as a kid, she'd collect, the sweet wrappers, because no one was going to buy a sweet, she would say. You take the sweetie wrappers, and then they collect sea glass, and that would be their monopoly money. So this idea of waste as treasure, and recycling it and reimagining it through play and creative production, is something that really seems to be becoming increasingly prominent within my work. So reflecting on how we engage in the coastline as well. So the tides became such a rhythmic kind of influence on that practice as well. And, just watching the tides when we were doing the filming and things. And this reminds me actually of a recent conversation I had with one of my colleagues at the Black Curriculum when we were recording our podcast. He was another educator with me, and he had this amazing he was talking about dialectics, and he referenced like Camus Braithwaite, who was saying to park this idea of dialectics in favor of tidalectics, so in favor of the rhythms of the ecology of the island of Barbados, and in favor of these tides, and refer to that rhythm in terms of how we engage with one another, how we share in our philosophies and our concepts and our critical engagement and in our creativity and our passions. So in this final work, there is always hope. That is something that I think always has to be remembered. And one of the questions I ask myself is, how can I diversify my practice to contribute to systemic change and the care of natural spaces? Because as I started out at the beginning of this conversation, or this presentation, I'm actively reinvesting in those relationships with the natural world. So for me, I think care is a radical act. To consistently give care to oneself, to your family, to your community, to your natural environment, that is radical. It's something that it's so easy to undervalue, but it's such a prominent part of our lives. And when it's not present, you so feel it. And so for me, when I look at my creative practice, I see that, or I feel that it's not limited by creative discipline. It's limited by my value system, which is why I have to actively work and invest in ensuring that that value system is one that empowers my creative practice. So such values that sit within that system are freedom, adventure, legacy, and care. So to ensure that the things that we talk about, the questions that we're raising, the critical inquiries, the relationships that we have, whether we're talking about anti-racism, racial literacy, whether we're talking about decolonizing curriculums, or, you know, in other roles, in other faces, in other positions, I'm talking about acts of rewilding, ethical and sustainable practices, and, you know, environmental justice, or highlighting, which I think is so critical, the ecology between these things, not to silo them, but to see the interconnectivity of all of these issues and acts and things that the challenges that we're facing. To me, I have to act that out. As the Kukama showed to me back in 2017, when they acted out that relationship with nature, that symbiotic relationship, I also have to act out those behaviors through interventionist strategies via education, creativity, through art, through ecology, through the community outreach that I do. So for me, in terms of legacy, in terms of my son here, who, you know, he has the marine identity of Britain and Barbados, which are impacted upon his skin in the slingshot that's within his hand. So I have to act that out because in so many cases, we do what we see every day. So I wanted to read this quote, which was actually on the wall of Turner Contemporary when I visited last August. And, you know, I was really, I'll be honest, I was quite intimidated by the place. I always am by quite a lot of contemporary art spaces. And I read this and I realized something about myself. So when the poet Jean Toomer walked through the South in the early 20s, he discovered a curious thing. Black women whose spirituality was so intense and so deep and so unconscious that they themselves were unaware of the richness that they held. They dreamed dreams that no one knew, not even themselves. They waited for a day when the unknown thing that was in them would be made known. For these grandmothers and mothers of ours were not saints, but artists, creators, who lived lives of spiritual waste because they were so rich in spirituality, which is the basis for art. Now, this is taken from Alice Walker's writings In Search of Her Mother's Gardens. And this inspired me because I was like, you know what, I'm from a long line, I'm from a lineage of creators, of artists, on both my Caribbean side and on my British side. But for me, when they reference this idea of the unconscious and, you know, this something so intense and unknown thing, for me, I think I'm going through this kind of tidal awakening, revealing new stories of fluorescence and shifting positionalities, but I have to pay attention because just like in, you know, when I've been in Margate and Ramsgate and Sandwich Bay over the last few months, if you don't pay attention, you never know when these opportunities or these revelations, they may only be shown to you the once, so I have to pay attention. And I think, to be honest, I don't really have an understanding or really conceive of what I'm truly capable of in any way. I don't think I really know, because so many times when there were limits and they were hard lines, you know, hard lines of where, you know, of loss and grief, of depression, postnatal depression, all these kinds of things, limits that I thought were monoliths that I could not get past, that I could not step over, that I would not overcome. And yeah, because of some kind of way in which I am, I pick up my foot and I go to move anyway. And as soon as I took that action, that line and that horizon shifted back. And when I stepped down, the place where I then stood was reorientated, it was reframed. And that viewpoint to envision then the futures that could potentially be open was so intoxicating and effervescent and transcendent. You know, and I learned so much from that. And I'm surrounded by so many iridescent minds, I think. You know, my work as an educator at the Black curriculum, through being a contemporary visual artist, it is astonishing how many people, like, these minds are like constellations that I'm getting to work with. And, you know, my friends and my family and stuff as well, and other artists, it's extraordinary, the kind of light map that I seem to be moving within. So, you know, when we were talking before, I mentioned Moulton and Hartley's undercommons, and I think that could be described as the unprofessional world beyond the beyond. And when I imagine such a place, I imagine the deepest parts of the ocean. I imagine the place where you go past the twilight strata, where the sun's light no longer reaches. And when you get to that point of that absolute pitch darkness, you find life that is able to create its own light. We find bioluminescence. I mean, this is a place where life has evolved to such a point that it's not even that it can identify itself or you see it, but that there's actual languages of light that they communicate with each other in. That this is a place where resilience and resistance has evolved for such a point that they can withstand such incredible pressures that there's no way that you and I in our corporal selves could withstand that. And that these biological structures, these beings, this bio-communal kind of fantastic kind of community is able, through constant regeneration in some species, to live immortal lives, or the closest that one may find themselves to that. So in my estimation, if we can't conceive of the breadth of life that we have on this earth, I don't see how, I can't think that we can ever really imagine what we're truly capable of. So in bringing this presentation to a close, and we can move to the panel discussion and maybe open up some of the legacies and questions or themes that have been inherent within this presentation. And I just want to thank you for listening, really. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can return back to everyone. Hello? Hello, Fiona. Hi.
Hi. That was fantastic.
Beautiful.
So, I mean, I wanted to say it's been such a privilege working with Fiona and Victoria. It's been an extraordinary experience. And when I say of connection and things, I've said to them before personally that I hope those are friendships that continue, because it's been just extraordinary being able to connect with you. So yeah, I wondered if there were questions or things that we could open up from that initial presentation.
Well, just to say, I mean, I feel the same. I feel that, this commission came about, I think it was last September or October. And, you can imagine someone making a digital commission and it would be one film. But Christina has made 4 films, an entire exquisite novella, and has done these amazing kind of community engagement kind of acts, I suppose you could say. And I was just thinking then that you, it's a digital commission, but you've connected with so many people, even during lockdown. And actually then you connected a whole load of people who lived in Margate who had never met each other. And you were sort of the linchpin that did that. And I just wondered how you felt about the sort of place, investing in the place, spending time walking, meeting people, and then this being a digital commission, and how do you feel about the relationship between the sort of real place and then it being digital?
I think like this presentation that I think like with this presentation that we have today, the amount of people that you can engage and connect to has widened considerably, although the questions of the depth of those connections can be quite difficult. But I think as well, my work as an educator, we are connecting with so many people virtually and being able to share so many things. But I think our lives are hybrid in many ways, so that's what we're working towards. So the ability to connect, to like walk with Victoria and Kelly, along the shoreline and have our conversations, and then to be able to share that or some feeling of that, through all these kind of digital channels, I think is, it means it doesn't just end with us, it goes beyond that. So, and I think, so that legacy is something that I think is really incredible, and I've learned a lot from as well. I'm really trying to adapt and, really assimilate so many of these things that have come up.
When,
I was just going to say again, just to is that okay?
Yeah.
Let me just turn that down a bit. Talking about a digital commission and having a fun old time with my digital. Again, congratulations. I think what I wanted to ask was, one of the things that I've really taken from this was the idea of what happens next.
Yeah.
And the responsibility of galleries or cultural organisations who have commissions such like this that were very much about targeting marginalised communities and artists to get them involved. I definitely feel afterwards, having worked with you, that you know, People Dem Collective feel like there's a responsibility for us to ensure that the development continues. And I guess I just wanted to know, you know, has your expectation of what you would get out of the commission changed since being part, you know, since, you know, winning it?
Yeah, I think so. I think utterly, but I do think that's because of like the relationships that you've created in many ways, you know. I mean, I think when I initially first came to the Courtauld and I presented as an educator, you know, we talked about the responsibility of, you know, all educational practitioners to kind of confront and open up the challenges that we have within society, because the barriers that are in place for so many that we see within the education system, that's stopping so much talent coming into the art world, the art that we're missing out on. Do you know what I mean? The way in which the breadth of that canon of material, of that experience within Britain, you know, with that, you know, I want to enable that and ensure that comes through. And I think a legacy of this is that fact of like how you continue that journey, or, you know, that kind of maybe post-commission legacies or support, and how you continue to, from once you've had this opportunity, how do you develop that into something else? Do you know what I mean? How do you continue on that pathway, or even define where the trajectory of your practice is now going to be going? So it's not just kind of like, you know, a one-off kind of like experience, but you've you know, this is a project that's turned into a program of work, and where you're going maybe for the next 6 or 12 or 18 months, and how you can inform that. So yeah, I think that's a key part of it.
I mean, you're sort of hatching a plan about maybe doing something later, you and Victoria. Is there sort of particular things that you quite like to explore building on this project, or working in Margate or elsewhere?
Victoria, do you want to answer that, and then I can have a go, or shall I go first? Yeah, it's up to you.
Okay, yeah. I think one of the things that I found with, particularly with Christina and this commission, was it was the first time for me that I had the lens of consuming art that was attached to my identity. I'd never experienced that before. And so I was extremely touched and was like, oh, wow, so you can do art this way, you know. And as Christina said before, you know, where I come from, on my estate, you weren't going to the Turner Contemporary. So I'm very lucky in some respects that I had opportunities for me to be able to discover and interrogate what that space is and what it means to me. However, the lens hasn't been that one of identity, and it's been so rewarding. So I think what I'd love to be able to continue the work, and that's what we're hoping to do, is be able to offer that opportunity to many other Black and brown communities who visit, you know, Margate. We've got a history, a long history, 20 years plus, of, you know, African and Caribbean churches who come and visit our beach. But they don't go in necessarily into Turner Contemporary. They don't necessarily venture from the beach to anywhere else. They've got amazing sound systems, barbecues happening, having the, you know, we're having the best time. But it would be amazing to be able to, you know, work on and develop what Christina's, you know, done so far, and be able to engage with those audiences so they can also have that experience of having that lens. And then I think one other thing for me is that it's not just about the art, it's very much about that development. It's very much about, okay, we know that for quite a long time now, there's lots of commissions like this. So we've got step one, right, we get it. Yes, we need to have more commissions that target artists that are not being seen. But what's the next bit? The next bit for me is very much about that artist development. It doesn't necessarily have to be about an outcome of art, but what is it that Christina what is it that you might need to make sure that you can thrive? We've identified that there might have been challenges for you to get into a space like that. Those challenges don't just disappear after the commission. They're still there. There's still some challenges. And how can we support Christina to be able to, you know, thrive and do work that she wants? And I don't think a one-off commission can do that. And so I'm just so excited to be able to offer support, mentorship, and to collaborate with Christina so we can continue to develop her as an artist and whatever she wants to do. But also, like I said, for those, you know, for those Black and brown communities that visit Margate, to be able to see artwork that directly links to something attached to their identity is just golden. It feels amazing. Like, I felt amazing reading that commission and was like, oh, what? Like, oh, this is what happens. This is like, I hadn't even clocked. I thought I was doing it. I'd gone to the galleries, I'd kind of looked and like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then this came along and I was like, oh, this is another way to view art. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think leading from that, I think there's two things there. I think it's one, that idea of accessibility, which again, you know, working with like Fiona and also Dee and different people at Tonic Contemporary, like, you know, the perception is that some places like this can be, you know, difficult to access. But I'm hoping through like the work produced and also through myself as well, that this is something that more people from those backgrounds like my own can access, you know, because how do I say it? I like being accessible. I want to be visible in Margate when we work. You know, people can see my face. You can talk to me. You can ask me a question because it's just me. Do you know what I mean? I'm not, I don't know, like, you know, it's the art that you engage in the access. For me, I've never questioned that I'm entitled to that body of knowledge, because that's what I see art as. There's so many ways in which you go into so many ideas, experiences, you know what I mean? And those bodies of knowledge of mine, I don't, even if I do feel maybe take a moment before I step over the threshold, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care if I'm welcome or not. That's mine. It's so amazing, the breadth of artwork and contemporary art and what people are producing and what's there. And when we talk of that undercurrent, you know, this stuff is being produced, whether we're always seeing it in like kind of, you know, the upper echelons in terms of our society, in terms of those places, but it's there and it's real and it's fervent, you know what I mean? It's intense. So I just, you know, I want to share that. I want to learn about that. I want to see what people are doing. And then I want to see, like, you know, what we create organically in synergy with those communities, you know, because I think that's where the innovation lies and the evolution lies, you know what I mean? Because that's when you get light languages, do you know what I mean? And like immortality and stuff like that. That's the proper undercommons, I think. So yeah, that would be cool. So I was just gonna have a look in this chat function as well. Oh, right, okay. So we've got a question here, it looks like. So you discussed the climate environment throughout your pieces and the commission with Margate specifically. Do you feel a responsibility as an artist to highlight these issues? And do you feel that people should look to the arts to better educate themselves? So what do we think about that question, if you can see it as well, ladies? So I'd say, yeah, go on, Victoria.
I'll just... I think for sure, I feel like art does create an opportunity. It's going back to that word again, accessibility. I think, you know, though quite often we're always talking about how inaccessible it is, and often it's more about the buildings or the vehicle in which the art is delivered is the bit that's inaccessible. But I think art can play a really important part in relation to the environment and climate, just as your work has. I think one of the things that were really interesting about your commission was that, you know, you also spoke about lack of representation within, you know, that the industry with regards to, you know, the environmental industry and ecology, and I found that really interesting, that not only was, again, being rewarded in some respects in relation to identity, but also having a I think some of the conversations that we had that I found really interesting was about, if there is that lack of representation, how are we getting those voices from those Black and brown communities who it also impacts? So definitely, I think, you know, art's another way of getting the message across and creating discussion, conversation around it.
What do you think, Fiona, from your perspective as a curator? I mean, what's your kind of reflection in regards to those questions?
I mean, I definitely agree. I think, you know, not all art does that or can do that. A lot of art, you know, some art is not accessible, some art is accessible. But I feel like the art that affects me often does address something social and political and kind of shifts how you think. And I think, you know, in your work, one of the things I really like about it is that way everything interconnects. So there's like this sort of like, I don't know, bias fluorescent level of it, which is like kind of deep ecology, you know, that you're obviously like tuned in on that kind of level, but then you're connecting to real people and how climate change affects often marginalized communities. So it's sort of making those links. It's, you know, it can't just be a kind of universalized thing, the way you're drawing the links and connecting it to real people and real people's stories, but also this very kind of quite sort of biological, ecological quality, like in the drawing and the research. I think that's what I find interesting.
I think you're right there, and I think with that, I think it's all the things, you know, the racisms and the different things that we've talked about, you know, racial justice and things and environmental justice. This is something that so many of these issues, they interconnect, but sometimes what I find frustrating, I think, is that when we look at things like the UK environmental movement, is that I think sometimes we're seeing the same things happening again, where you're seeing other voices and other communities that this directly references are not being represented, or they're not given a sufficient platform to have a voice, because especially when you talk about climate change, this is a global phenomenon that's happening in so many different ways. And also the fact that people from those communities, you know, the amount of money in remittance that comes out of the UK across Central and South America, across the African continent, the Caribbean, all over the world, because people are already paying in this country from those communities for those families in other places. So they're already paying for the effects of climate change, just because it's not seen as like a necessarily maybe a budget in terms of our, you know, now in terms of a critical budget, because of we're in such a, you know, increasingly in difficult position. So I think that needs to be really addressed, because I think so many times the way in which people provide for one another isn't recognised. And I think that again, that comes down to that idea of care as a radical act, because it is radical to provide for those outside of your borders, even, you know, when you're your family and things, and working yourself to, you know, to do that. So that provision of care is very, very important. I was going to say, I saw a previous question here, which I apologies that I didn't see before, from Glenn. He said, you mentioned the archipelago at the beginning of the talk. Does the archipelago play a particular metaphorical, spatial or political role in your work? And I'd say, well, that was very well observed, because increasingly it really is. I love this idea of islands, when you look at natural histories and the way in which they're interconnected, whether it's tidal, whether it's, you know, coral atolls or whatever it is, that the way in which all these different, you know, the way in which we see land masses and we see countries, but actually underneath, when you look at what's happening in terms of natural history and the plates of the earth, these are all things that are interconnected. So, you know, especially when we're talking about, you know, kind of tribalism and nationalism and different things, I think ecology really brings out the way in which diversity can be realized and how we connect with one another. So yes, politically, environmentally, I think it's something that I'm definitely going to be playing with more in my work, and I'm hoping to have the opportunity maybe in some spaces to be able to do that. So yeah, that's a great observation, Glenn. Thanks. So let me see here, we've got a couple more. Oh no, we did that one. Okay, so I think this may have to be our last question, maybe. I know we've got about 5 minutes or so. So what responses to the Sacred Ecologist, what have responses to the Sacred Ecologist been like from students and young people you have worked with, e.g. like within CFO in Croydon? Well, the commission isn't live yet, actually. And I was going to say, so I'm going to be working on a programme, so with the Croydon African and Caribbean family organisation. So this is an organisation that's also an education provider, alternative education provider. So children or young people that are outside of mainstream education system have in kind of intensive kind of education, then go back into the into mainstream education. But for that, I was going to be doing an arts and ecology program, but we've had to move that back because of COVID. So and that's part of what I consider part of my community outreach work. So I will be sharing that, and the ideas for this commission heavily influence that, because within that program, in terms of art history, I'm going to be profiling, say, Black British artists as the direct kind of narrative, because, you know, this is as you said, a Caribbean African kind of family organisation and support, and then looking at ecologies and how that links with that. What are the stories within their communities and that empowerment, you know, between that and contemporary art. So yeah, that's how that's fed into that. So yeah. I was going to thank you, ladies, as well. You guys have been great. It's always fun chatting with both of you, Fiona and Victoria. So.
Yeah, thank you all so much. That was genuinely so fascinating. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. Christina, I just wanted to say that I love that your mum is here and I'm your biggest fan, and that has completely made my day. It's made me so happy, and it's just lovely to see. But yeah, thank all three of you again for joining us, and we hope everyone at home as well can come to another research forum event soon. So yeah, have a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Take care.